Dr. Night Echoes. Fritz Harman was a serial killer in Germany. He was active between 1918 and 1924. I am explaining the case of the Butcher of Hanover. He murdered at least 24 young men and boys. He lured his victims to his apartment near the main railway station. He killed them by biting through their throats while they slept. He then dismembered the bodies in his kitchen. He disposed of the bones in the Lena River. During a time of food shortages, he sold the victims' clothes and potentially their meat on the black market. He claimed the meat was pork. Police arrested him in June 1924 after a young man escaped his apartment. Children also found many human bones in the river. This discovery led detectives back to his home. During his trial, he remained calm and even joked with the judges. He was found guilty of 24 murders. The court sentenced him to death. In April 1925, he was executed by guillotine. His head was preserved for medical research and kept at a university for many years. His case led to changes in how German police track missing persons. Ted Bundy was a serial killer in the United States. He was active between 1974 and 1978. I am directly explaining the case of a man who murdered at least 30 young women and girls across 7 states. He was charming and often used a fake injury, like a cast or a sling, to ask women for help with his car. Once they were near his vehicle, he would hit them over the head with a crowbar and kidnap them. He performed sexual assaults and murdered his victims, often by strangulation or blunt force trauma. He frequently revisited the crime scenes to perform acts of necrophilia with the remains. Police arrested him multiple times, but he escaped from custody twice. During his final trial in Florida, he acted as his own lawyer. He used his legal knowledge to manipulate the proceedings and even received well wishes from the judge. Despite his charisma, forensic evidence from bite marks on a victim's body led to his conviction. The court sentenced him to death. He spent years on death row and eventually blamed pornography for his violent urges. In January 1989, he was executed by electric chair. Gary Ridgway was a serial killer in the United States. He was active between 1982 and 1998. I am directly explaining the case of the Green River Killer. He was convicted of murdering 49 women in Washington state, though he confessed to as many as 71. He targeted vulnerable women, primarily sex workers and runaways. He lured them into his truck by showing them a picture of his son to gain their trust. He then strangled them to death using his hands or a ligature. He disposed of their bodies in remote, wooded areas near the Green River. He often returned to the sites to engage in necrophilia. Police first suspected him in 1983, but he passed a polygraph test in 1984. In 1987, he provided a saliva sample, but technology was not yet advanced enough for a match. He was finally arrested in November 2001 after DNA evidence linked him to 4 of the victims. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to a plea bargain and led investigators to burial sites. In 2003, a court sentenced him to 48 consecutive life terms without parole. He received a 49th life sentence in 2011 after another victim's remains were found. Richard Chase was a serial killer in the United States. He was active between December 1977 and January 1978. I am directly explaining the case of the Vampire of Sacramento. He murdered 6 people in California. He believed his blood was turning into powder, and he needed to consume others to survive. His first victim died in a random drive-by shooting. Later, he entered homes through unlocked doors. He shot his victims before mutilating their bodies. He used a blender to mix blood and organs into a drink. In one incident, he killed a woman and her young nephew. He also practiced cannibalism and necrophilia. A former classmate recognized him and contacted the police. Officers arrested him at his apartment in 1978. Inside, they found human remains in his refrigerator. At his trial, he pleaded insanity. The jury found him legally sane and guilty of 6 murders. He received a death sentence in 1979. He died in prison from a drug overdose in 1980. John Wayne Gacy was a serial killer in the United States. He was active between 1972 and 1978. I am explaining the case of a man known as the Killer Clown. He murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men in Illinois. He lured most victims to his home by promising them construction work. Once there, he used a handcuff trick to restrain them. He strangled most of his victims with a rope or a piece of wood. He buried 26 of the bodies in the narrow crawl space under his house. He put 3 others in various parts of his property and threw 4 into the Des Plaines River. Police began watching him after a 15-year-old boy vanished in 1978. During a search of his home, officers noticed a terrible smell coming from the floorboards. They soon discovered the skeletal remains hidden below. He was arrested in December 1978. At his trial, his lawyers tried to use an insanity defense, but the jury rejected it. He was convicted of 33 murders and received a death sentence. He spent 14 years on death row. In May 1994, he was executed by lethal injection. His house was later demolished. H. Holmes was a killer in the United States. He was active between 1891 and 1894. I am explaining the case of a man who built a murder castle in Chicago. This building had 3 floors. It contained secret passages, trapdoors, and rooms with no windows. He often lured women from the 1893 World's Fair to stay there. He killed his victims using gas jets installed in their rooms. He also used soundproof vaults to suffocate people. Afterward, he dropped the bodies down a secret chute to the basement. There, he used acid or fire to destroy the remains. He sometimes sold the skeletons to medical schools for money. Police confirmed 9 victims, but he may have killed up to 200 people. He was eventually caught for an insurance fraud scheme. This happened after he killed his partner, Benjamin Peitzel, and 3 of Peitzel's children. Detectives tracked him across the country. They arrested him in Boston in 1894. During the trial, he confessed to many murders. The court found him guilty of the Peitzel murder. He received a death sentence. In May 1896, he was hanged. His castle burned down shortly after his arrest. Yang Xinhai was a serial killer in China. He was active between 1999 and 2003. I am explaining the case of the monster killer. He murdered 67 people and raped 23 women across 4 different provinces. He targeted rural families in Henan, Hebei, Anhui, and Shandong. He traveled long distances by bicycle or on foot to reach remote villages. He typically entered homes late at night while the occupants were sleeping. He used weapons like axes, hammers, and shovels to kill entire families. After the murders, he often raped the female victims. He was known for his speed and left very few clues behind for the local police. Police arrested him in November 2003 during a routine inspection of entertainment venues in Sangzhou. They noticed he was acting suspiciously and took him in for questioning. DNA evidence eventually linked him to multiple crime scenes across the country. He confessed to all the killings during his interrogation. He stated that he felt no remorse and killed because he wanted to. In February 2004, a court found him guilty and sentenced him to death. He was executed by a firing squad that same month. His spree remains one of the deadliest in modern history. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were serial killers in the United States. They were active in 1979. I am explaining the case of the Toolbox Killers. They murdered 5 teenage girls in California. They used a van nicknamed Murder Mac to kidnap their victims. Inside the van, they used common household tools like pliers, ice picks, and sledgehammers to carry out brutal torture. They recorded the screams of their victims on audio tapes. These recordings were so disturbing that they were later used to train FBI agents. After the torture, they strangled the girls and dumped their bodies in remote canyons. Police arrested them after Roy Norris bragged about the crimes to a friend, who then contacted the authorities. During the investigation, detectives recovered the audio tapes and the van. In 1981, Lawrence Bittaker received a death sentence, while Roy Norris received life in prison after testifying against his partner. Bittaker died of natural causes on death row in 2019. Norris died in prison in 2020. Their crimes remain some of the most sadistic in American history due to the specific use of tools for intentional suffering. The bodies of 2 victims were never found. Joseph James DeAngelo was a serial killer and rapist in the United States. He was active between 1974 and 1986. I am directly explaining the case of the Golden State Killer. He committed 13 murders and over 50 rapes across California. He began as a burglar before graduating to sexual assault and eventually homicide. He often targeted couples in their homes at night. He would tie up the man and place dishes on his back, threatening to kill everyone if the dishes rattled while he assaulted the woman. He was known for extensive stalking and would often break into homes weeks before an attack to learn the layout. The case went cold for decades. Investigators finally identified him in 2018 using forensic genealogy and DNA from a discarded tissue. He was 72 years old and living as a retired police officer when arrested at his home. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 kidnapping-related charges. In August 2020, the court sentenced him to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He remains imprisoned today. Robert Hansen was a serial killer in the United States. He was active between 1971 and 1983. I am directly explaining the case of the Butcher Baker. He murdered at least 17 women and raped over 30 others in Alaska. He targeted sex workers and dancers because he believed their disappearances would not be noticed. He kidnapped these women and flew them in his private plane to the remote Knik River Valley. Once there, he released them into the wilderness and hunted them with a rifle like wild game. He maintained a public image as a quiet baker and family man. This facade, along with his friendships with local police, protected him from suspicion for years. In 1983, a victim named Cindy Paulson escaped and provided details that led to a search warrant. Investigators found a map in his home marked with X symbols where he buried his victims. He confessed to the crimes to avoid a public trial. In 1984, the court sentenced him to 461 years plus life in prison. He died in a medical center while incarcerated in 2014. Mary Bell was a killer in the United Kingdom. She was active in 1968. I am explaining the case of a child who killed other children. She strangled 2 young boys in Newcastle upon Tyne. Her first victim was 4 years old. Her second victim was only 3 years old. She returned to the body of the second boy after he was dead. She used a pair of scissors to carve the letter M into his stomach. She also cut off some of his hair and mutilated his body. She was only 10 years old during the first murder and 11 during the second. Police arrested her after she displayed suspicious behavior and gave conflicting statements during the investigation. In December 1968, a court convicted her of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. She served 12 years in custody. Authorities released her in 1980 when she was 23 years old. In 2003, she won a legal battle to extend this anonymity for life. Legal orders that protect the identities of notorious criminals in the UK are now often called Mary Bell orders. She remains free today under her secret name. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka were serial killers in Canada. They were active between 1987 and 1992. I am directly explaining the case of the Ken and Barbie killers. Paul Bernardo was also known as the Scarborough Rapist for committing at least 14 sexual assaults before the murders. Together, the couple kidnapped, tortured, and murdered 3 teenage girls. Their victims included Karla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy Homolka, whom they drugged and assaulted on Christmas Eve 1990. They later abducted 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and 15-year-old Kristen French. They held these girls captive, filmed the sexual assaults on videotape, and eventually strangled them. They dismembered Mahaffey's body and encased the parts in concrete blocks. Police arrested the couple in February 1993 after DNA evidence linked Bernardo to the Scarborough rapes. Karla Homolka portrayed herself as a victim of Bernardo's abuse and struck a plea bargain known as the Deal with the Devil. She received a 12-year sentence for manslaughter in exchange for testifying against her husband. However, hidden videotapes later proved she was an active participant in the crimes. In 1995, a court convicted Bernardo of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. Homolka was released from prison in 2005 after completing her sentence. Andrei Chikatilo was a serial killer in the Soviet Union. He was active between 1978 and 1990. I am directly explaining the case of the Rostov Ripper. He murdered at least 52 women and children. He targeted his victims at bus stations and train stops. He lured them into nearby woods by offering food or alcohol. Once they were alone, he attacked them with a knife. He did not just kill his victims, he mutilated their bodies. He often removed their eyes and tongues. He also practiced cannibalism on many of the remains. His crimes caused widespread panic because he moved frequently to avoid detection. Police arrested him in November 1990 after a detective noticed him acting strangely near a train station. DNA technology was limited at the time, but investigators eventually linked him to the crime scenes. During his trial, he was kept in a metal cage to protect him from the families of his victims.
He behaved erratically in court to try and prove he was insane. The court found him sane and guilty of 52 murders. In 1992, he received a death sentence. He was executed by a single gunshot to the head in February 1994.
Ed Kemper was a serial killer in the United States. He was active from 1964 to 1973. I am explaining the case of the co-ed killer. He murdered 10 people, including 6 female college students, his paternal grandparents, his mother, and her best friend. He stood 6 feet and 9 inches tall and weighed 300 pounds. He used his massive size and friendly appearance to lure young women into his car. He would then stab, shoot, or strangle them. After the murders, he often took the bodies back to his home for mutilation and necrophilia. He eventually murdered his mother in her sleep before decapitating her. After killing his mother, he called the police himself to confess because he felt the mission was over. He had previously been institutionalized as a teenager for killing his grandparents, but was released at age 21. During his 1973 trial, he requested the death penalty, but California had suspended it at the time. The court sentenced him to 8 concurrent life sentences. He remains imprisoned at the California Medical Facility today. He has become known for narrating hundreds of audiobooks for the blind while serving his time behind bars. Rodney Alcala was a serial killer in the United States. He was active between 1971 and 1979. I am explaining the case of the dating game killer. He murdered at least 8 people, though authorities suspect he killed over 100. He often posed as a professional photographer to lure young women and girls. He would take their pictures before attacking them. His methods were brutal. He strangled his victims until they lost consciousness, then waited for them to wake up before strangling them again. He repeated this process multiple times to prolong their suffering. He also committed multiple sexual assaults. In 1978, while in the middle of his killing spree, he appeared as a contestant on the national TV show The Dating Game and won. Police arrested him in 1979 after he kidnapped and murdered a 12-year-old girl in California. During a search of a storage locker, investigators found thousands of photos of unidentified women and children. He was tried multiple times and received several death sentences. However, he died of natural causes in prison in July 2021 at age 77. Many of his suspected victims remain unidentified because he kept so many photos.